Morning, everyone. We're live. I have my coffee. I've done my dog walk, and it is so sticky and humid outside. We're due to get rain and start to have a bit of a cool front. And my husband calls this time of year, we feel like it's the war against the north and the south because we happen to be where two major fronts just fight back and forth for a couple months. But it does signal a transition into fall. For that, excuse me, clear my voice. I am ready. Obviously, I have not spoken that much this morning so far because my throat's not clear. But welcome to the Be More Successful Show. I'm Leslie Hassler. I am a small business scaling strategist, in case you don't know that. What I do is I work with service-based businesses to get them growing and scaling again. Now, that does tend to mean that we work a lot on cash. We work a lot on profitability because you need money to fuel that growth. We work in team. We really just work on it all. I'm very unique in what I do in that I was an entrepreneur first, kind of in the trenches with you, if you will. And how I coach is a very entrepreneur to entrepreneur. So we're looking at the whole health of your business, the whole sustainability, and not like in being green, but in your ability to maintain it, to be able to have a legacy, to stay in business. And that's that kind of sustainability to me. And the reason why I do what I do is really about empowering prosperity for all business owners. I believe it's possible. I believe in the abundance of it. And as crazy as this world is, I don't think we have true equality until we have true prosperity for all. So that's one reason why I do what I do. I share so much on this Be More Successful show. I give a lot away, but I sell stuff too. And that's okay. That's how I afford to give it away, if you will. And one of the things I love the most is when somebody sees me in real life and they come up and they're like, oh my gosh, I watch your show all the time. Oh, this changed this for me, or I really loved this. So if you are watching this live, say howdy. Give me a shout out. If you are seeing this as a replay, that's groovy. That's part of the reason why we do this, where we do this. But just tell me that you're watching on a replay. If you hear something, by all means, call it out so I know what really struck home, landed well. And last thing, and then we'll get to the really good stuff, is if you really like today, share this. That's how we get this message out to the people that need to see it. And it really is quite interesting how many phone calls or comments that I get that say, oh my gosh, I heard this just at the right time. So today we're talking about profitability and how you can be more profitable now. And I thought we'd come to this. I was speaking for the Nabo San Antonio group on cash flow, and they challenged me to come to them with something different on cash flow, something they hadn't heard before. And I was like, oh, I have no problem with that. I know that what I'm going to share with you is very different. And part of cash flow is profitability, because you really do need profit. I mean, you need revenue, right? But there's a certain point in time to where you should be profitable. Like there's this concept called minimum viable profitability, my concept, because I got so tired of reading about minimum viable products for product-based business. Like, when do you know that this is going to work? And so I do a lot of research and I immerse myself in a lot of the theory and the strategy that's going on behind this. And I really think hard about how do we make this work for a service-based business? What is there to learn? And so in knowing that minimum viable product type of a thing, and you've heard me talk about it before, I really started going, well, the product is ideas, it's service, it's the head, the heart, and the hands, right? And so really what we need to look for is that minimum viable profitability. But we don't focus on that right away. And I think there's a couple of reasons why. Number one is our expectation. This is something that we've got off. Like, we need to get this on the right track because we have been in such a hustle and grind culture. You have to work hard. That's our Puritan roots. Work hard, grow big enough, and some magical day, the little profit fairy is going to come out and go, ding, you've earned your profit. That doesn't happen, does it? It really doesn't. And so if we can get away from this concept that profit is a reward and embrace the concept that profit is intention, like we expect to be profitable, that's almost our first goal, is to see how small of a business we can generate at a high level of profitability. If you can get that little ratio, let's say, done, and I'll give you some tips in a second, don't worry. If you can fix that ratio, then you actually have a business that can fuel and scale itself. We can play with this business, and it's actually a really fun place to play when we get profitability right. So a couple of the other things you might notice and some of the problems that impinge our ability to be profitable is really, number one, stalled out growth. I have yet to see a business that plateaus or is hanging out, is maintaining this for a period of time that isn't losing profitability. And it's really interesting. I have this study on my desk because I told you I geek out on this stuff. So this is, what is that? The 2020 report on employer firms' small business credit survey by the Federal Reserve. And they talked about pricings, rising prices, rising cost, if you will. And what was really interesting to me is there were two statistics in there. And, it was like 40% of the businesses were not profitable. I was like, okay, that's interesting. I'm reading on, and they said in 39% experienced rising costs, but did not increase pricing. And I wanted to go, duh. Does anyone see that correlation there? Rising costs happen. They just happen. They happen all the time. They happen very much. This is in the line of, how do you boil a frog? You turn up the water very slowly. That's what happens in a business. It's not so much that suddenly one of your costs goes out of whack, and maybe it does. That happens. But more often what it is that is the gradual increases over time that go unnoticed that erode the profitability, especially if you're not growing. If you're growing, that cash flow mask hides that problem, unless you've got somebody like me or some other advisor that's actually looking at that for you so that you can pay attention to it. So rising costs. The other thing, and this is a kicker, especially in service-based businesses, is not implementing strategies that boost productivity. When your largest line item is labor, and it is a service-based business, your focus on productivity and efficiency needs to be a part of the strategic plan, because that's how you maintain profitability. So let's get a little into this. So if profitability is an intention and an expectation, where do we go? Because if you can generate enough profit for enough time, you actually see cash. Because you can generate profit, and let's say you end the year at $20,000, and your CPA comes to you and he's like, congratulations, you made $20,000 in profit, and you have a $6,000 tax bill. And you're like, what? What? If I made profit, where's the money? There's a second half to profitability, right? And we'll talk about that in another episode. But really and truly, I want you to see that this has to be an intention, and it's a full life cycle type of an intention, so that not only do you create it and it appears on your books, your P&L statements, but that it actually manifests itself in your bank account, because you can have profit but no cash. And that's not a fun problem to have. Excuse me, guys. Okay, so if you're watching, say howdy. So I know you're there. So let's talk about a few things. So first off, let's change our intention. Now, there are two places that you can check profitability on your P&L statement. One is at gross profit, and that's above all of your operational expenses. So it tends to be like when the first 10 lines on your P&L, depending on if you have cost of good. If you don't have cost of good, it's like line 3. Okay, and it will say gross profit. It will tell you in dollars, but it won't. You have to do the math, or you run a different report that shows you percentage. And the percentage is really, we look at percentage and dollars, but percentage is our benchmark where we know if the machine is operating well. Now, when you have net profit margin, that's the one all the way down to the bottom. It's like 3 rows up from the bottom on your P&L statement. That's how much money is left over, right, after you go through your operations. So we want to make sure that our gross profit margin is large enough to allow for money to filter through. I'm assuming you've gone through your operational expenses and you are running as lean as possible. Here's the kicker. What I see happen in service-based businesses is that we adopt too much of the product-based businesses mentality. Now, product-based business, because they're generating tremendous amount of volume, they can run on a lower margin, that's your percentage, than we might be able to as a service-based business. But because your resource is limited, time, right? Your time and your body, they're limited. You can't rely on that same thing. So that gross profit margin in my book for service-based businesses, the benchmark I use with every single one of my businesses, and this comes from studying a lot of different businesses, is 60%. Your gross profit margin needs to minimally be 60%. At 60%, you can probably see anywhere between a 1 to 10% net profit margin. And hey, any money left over at the end of the day is a good day. But I want to tell you what's possible, because this is so possible. Now, I would say 60%, I would say if you're reselling goods, doing something in that realm, that's where I would expect you to be. If you're not reselling, you don't really have a lot of direct project costs, if you will, then your gross profit margin should be higher. And to the tune of, I have 2 clients where our target is about 97%. There might be some direct project costs here and there, but truly 97%. I have another model where it's really 80%, right? We figured out where the model needs it to be. When you're operating in that higher realm, there's money left over at the end of the day that creates cash. That's the game that we're trying to play. And so if you can get into the 90s range, you could easily see 20, 30, 40 at full utilization per net profit margin. Like, that's coming out the end. And I can tell you, I've seen this happen in multiple 7-figure businesses that are operating this way. It's possible. You just need to set that expectation. And I see so many people fight this part. So let's talk a little bit about, let's just play. What if you could? What if you could boost that profitability? Because that's a game we need to be playing as the business owner, is how do I impact this number? What's the game? What's going to work? And I'm going to give you a few strategies. The first set of strategies is the 3 Ps. Okay, so it's pricing, profit centers, and productivity. Oh, there comes that word back in. Remember, we just talked about it. So pricing, by and far, is the easiest way, typically, to impact your profitability. But you need to know where it is. My editor challenged me to write an article on this for entrepreneur.com. We just finished our 2nd article, so we're going to move on to our 3rd. Write an article about how to increase your pricing and what to do, because there are strategies. There are people out there who will tell you to double and triple your prices, and maybe you should. However, I see that the mind and the heart of the business owner isn't always ready for that big of a leap. So I'm a little bit more of, where does it need to be? Where should it be to be profitable? Let's go 10% past that. Let's be a little uncomfortable, and let's go 10% past. Because you should stretch. Because the crazy thing is, it really works. But pricing, that's going to be the biggest way you can do that. If you've noticed that your costs have been rising, and if you've been paying attention, then your pricing needs to rise as well. Most people will not notice a 10% increase. They won't. It's just pretty easy, pretty standard. So anytime I've got a client that is like under 10% is where we need to be. We had one client I can actually use them a couple of different ways with what we're talking about. So what they needed to do is we needed to go from like a 48% profitability, gross profitability, to get up to 60. So we had to use a lot of different strategies. And one of them was pricing. In fact, we increased prices by 5%. And half the team felt like, oh my God, we're already so expensive. Nobody's ever going to buy from us again. Be careful of those ever words. Nobody's ever going to buy from us again. And I said, let's try. Let's just try. So we tried. You know what happened? People bought. I'm telling you. Okay. And that 5% actually went back into the business and went back into the team. So the team reaped the reward because we were having trouble hiring. And so we needed to raise the rates. And that percent increase actually fed back into the team so that we could bring the team up to a wage that attracted more team members. See, this is full cycle stuff, right? And if we had team members that were committed and happy, they worked more productively. Oh my gosh, isn't that interesting? Right? There's sometimes these strategies have very multiple legs and really can have exponential impact. So that was one thing that we did. The next thing we did was look at profit centers. So in this realm, I think there wound up being 11 different service types. And so once we separated them out and we looked at them individually, what we noticed is we had a huge dichotomy. We had some services that were underperforming, like to the 30 or 40%. And when we looked at those projects, those were all the problem projects, right? It was the ones that people are like, oh, please, I don't ever want to work for them again, right? That problem area. And then we had some that were performing like at 65 and 70%. But the amount, so we did a scatter graph. This is where I get a little geeky, but did a scatter graph. And it showed like up and down on the graph was how much profitability. And then how big the circle was how much in revenue. And what we found is a predominance of the revenue was down here in the low stuff. We really looked at what those services were and cut them. We cut a few and we kept a few. So we wanted to improve some because they actually turned into be what the word might be called a loss leader. It's a business that you take. It's not highly profitable, but it leads to more work. And so it's almost like a marketing strategy or getting paid to market. And so you can use it to funnel in as long as you actually have a process that funnels and that funnel works. But really and truly, we started looking at it. We're like, oh, this is what's killing us. Do we need to do that service? And a lot of times when we had the team at the table, they're like, actually, not really. It would be better. I think they would have been happier if we had actually done this service. And so we retooled. We dropped a few. We trimmed a few. We realigned a few. And that is one thing that we looked at is where's the profitability. So we actually boosted some of our lowest ones by 10 or 15%. And then we looked at a new service offering that the team had been hesitant to bring in because it was new and it was different and really changed the model. And we started looking at it and we're like, we need to play. We need to play with it. Just run it, test it, see what happens. No pressure. Well, that one wound up being 75% profitability. And this is not a small company, right? I mean, they probably have a team of 25 people. Not a small company. So really and truly, when you look at things like profit centers, you can see where things are kind of falling through the cracks. And that's money leaking out the door that right now you probably can't afford to have leaking out the door. So pricing, profitability. And the last one's productivity. So there is, it's interesting. Like if you look at product-based businesses, there is a utilization rate or a capacity rate, right? They know their machines are running at 60% capacity. And maybe they know they can get up to 80. I have found the same thing is true in service-based businesses. When you look at your capacity to earn income, and here's what I'm going to say first off. No one's ever at 100%, period, because there are things like holidays and vacations and sick days and days you're just not, your mojo's a little off. Nobody's at 100%. I have yet to see a business really operated 80%. You might have moments where you're pushing hard, but as a whole, like maintain operation at 80%, I still think that's kind of hard. But I think getting close is possible. And what I come in and I look at when, we do business audits, I've told you about those before. And one of the things I'll look at is what's the capacity to earn? What's the revenue per employee? Where are we operating at? How long do projects take? Especially if you track your time, even if salaried employees. But if you track the time around your services, what we see is most service-based businesses are actually operating at about a 40 to 50% capacity, which means even if you can only get to 70%, that difference, 50 to 70%, represents a lot of profitability because you're already paying for the resource in your people, right? We just need to make it possible for this to happen. And there's some psychology. I'll let you know, there's psychology goes into this because people like to feel busy. So even if they're not really utilized, they're making themselves busy, which is why you say, well, are you busy? Oh, yes, I'm busy. We're so busy. Okay. There's some strategies to work with that are fun and really motivate and inspire your teams. But it's something to look at to make sure that you're running as productively as you can, because that is your product. That is ultimately your metric about how well we're doing this. We tend to, though, feel busy, hire more employees, back end erode the profitability while that employee gets up to speed, right? And then we still only get a 50% return. So it's an area to look at and an area to manage, and then use fun and culture and competition to your advantage to produce productivity. The last thing, and man, we're going on today, aren't we? As I'm going to say, watch out for where profitability leaks, because in a service-based business, if it's not the hard costs, it leaks in interesting ways. So you may have said, Leslie, no way, Jose, I cannot do pricing. Pricing cannot increase for me. That's okay. But where I caution you to do is make sure you're not over-delivering on your service. My husband challenged me on this. He goes, but you over deliver. And I'm like, yeah, but I've priced my product to allow myself to over deliver. That way I can always over deliver and I feel good. Everyone feels good and we're all happy. Like that was a consciousness in my pricing of my work, was because I know I over deliver. And once I'm in, I'm all in. I'm in it to win it with you. Right. So I didn't want to have to pull back. I didn't want to have to say, oh, I'm sorry. We're at the end of our call today. We'll talk again in 2 weeks. That's not what I wanted to do in my business. So I priced my product to allow me to serve in the way that needed to be served, right? And sometimes, we all know this, nobody planned for March. But because of the way I price and because of the way I work with my clients, I could lean in. I felt fine leaning in, and that's what I wanted. But really think about how much you're over delivering. And if you really set your products pricing, your services pricing up to support that, because if you haven't, and most people have not, the over delivering is a leaking out of the profit because your intention's over here and it can't be on something else, or finding new business or serving another client to their completion. Now, don't be stingy. I'm not saying being stingy. I'm saying being conscious. Anything that you're aware of, you actually can impact. And that's half the battle when it comes to business management. The other thing, don't recreate the wheel. Every time you recreate the wheel, you are not getting any scaling, economies of scale. There's the word. So I have to check my time real fast. I have a child to go pick up in a few minutes. But when even in the most highly creative, and I can say this, my first business was highly customized, highly individualized, highly creative services. They really were. Yet we could define a process. And when we define that process, instead of it taking 8 weeks to do a project for a client, we could do it in 4. Not only could we do it in 4, but we could stack them. Whereas before, I might not take another client on for maybe halfway through one project. So I could only take on one new client a month. We were taking on a new client every week because that process made us very efficient at what we were doing. We all knew what the next step would be, even though what we were creating was a completely customizable product. That is the truth. And so stop recreating the wheel. I mean, allow for that individualism. I believe in that. It's one of my values, one of my strengths, right? But you can find the pattern underneath it. And when you do that, you can do things like weed out the stuff that you don't really need, that doesn't add any value. And you can choose how you can compress time. Because again, time and people are limited resources. So that's just another way to think of efficiencies and to think about how you can be more profitable, because you're achieving a greater output with the resources or with the return on investment. You're achieving an increased amount of that, which improves profitability. So that's it. That's a lot. And that's why profitability isn't really that simple. And it really, I think you do have to look at the individuality of the business, of the team, of the clients, of the market, so many other things, and why it takes things like a business audit. Honestly, every client starts with one, because we just have to, it's like getting under the hood and doing a tune-up. We're just seeing what's working, what's not working, so that we know where to focus. Because when we fix, things like profitability, we are taking your bucket that's full of holes and we're plugging it, right? We're plugging it. And then if we turn on the faucet, which is sales and marketing, right, you keep more in your bucket. Doesn't that sound like a great day? And at the end of the day, what that means for you is you can reward yourself. Hallelujah. You can reward your team, which is amazing and feels great. You can build a legacy for your family, for your community. You can have impact. You have longevity. Like all of the nervousness that comes around, and the feeling of failure, and the lack of confidence, and blah, 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 all the gobbledygook that we deal with in our heads and in our hearts, it really does fall away when you have some really strong foundations to hold you. And profitability is one of those foundations. So that's it for today, guys. Be sure to give me a shout out. Let me know that you saw this. If you loved today's, and it was chunka full of great strategies, share it. Let other people know. Tag another business owner. Say, dude, you got to watch this. And then we'll be back on Thursday. We are doing a little back end scene since Facebook has forced us into the new world. They're actually changing a lot of things. And so our notification systems, I'm having to rebuild, and just how things get integrated with Facebook, we're having to work on. So bear with us for the next week or so while we get all that straightened out. But we'll be back on Thursday with another episode about this same time. I think I liked 8:10. Give me a little less pressure off of the dog walk and getting cleaned up for you to get on to today's show. So that's it today. Thank you so much. I hope you're having a profitable day, and I'll talk to you soon. This has been Leslie Hassler with Your Biz Rules Business Coaching.